Hi, my name is Bridget Richardson, and I'm the Assistant Director of Ecumenical and Pastoral Initiatives at the Nesty Center for Faith and Culture at University of St. Thomas in Houston. And I'm here with our founder, Father Donald Nesty, and also Stephen Arbogast, author and professor of the practice of finance at University of North Carolina, Keenan Flagner Business School. So thank you both for joining me today.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
And today we're going to talk about something that is definitely ever present in people's minds, COVID-19 and the economy. So Stephen, if you could just kind of jump into how should people of faith understand and make sense of the pandemic and its effects on the economy?
Okay, well, I think that begins with appreciating how serious the effect on the economy is going to be. I don't think we have yet begun to experience and realize the depth of the economic damage and consequences that the pandemic is, wrecking on the economy. You're talking about whole industries basically being savaged, and I don't mean to use an emotive word here, but if you're in the hospitality industry, if you're in the airline industry, if you're in the entertainment industry, if you're running a restaurant or a bar, you can't see a pathway to, come out of this yet. We have restaurants in Chapel Hill. They've said, okay, you can reopen and have, 50% capacity. And the restaurant owners are writing back basically saying, we can't make any money at 50% capacity. If you follow business, usually the profit that a business makes comes in the last 20% of utilization. The first 80% is, to pay the bills. So, I think we're going to be looking at a situation that this generation has not seen before. In terms of hardship and distress. That's kind of the beginning of the discussion. And so, then sort of say, okay, as people of faith, what do you bring to this time of likely very, very enhanced hardship versus what we've known in recent decades? And there are a number of justice issues that jump out. Interestingly, one of the justice issues is what is your obligation to the business that you're involved in? And I wouldn't necessarily count on people to see this as a justice issue, but I think one of the big justice obligations that business people have is to make a decision as to whether their business is viable coming out of the pandemic. If it's potentially viable, they have to do everything to try to save the business. That means, what is it going to take to hang in there for the recovery, to keep our people committed, to be able to sustain our suppliers and our customers, so that there's jobs and employment and a future for people to look at. The hard other piece of it is, if it isn't viable, you have to wrap it up. You have to, and think about, okay, what are we going to do instead in the new environment? And I don't think it's common for people to frame things that way. But it is a justice issue to make a discerned decision about whether, what does it take to save a viable business, and when do we make a good decision to basically move in another direction? So I would say that's the first thing, and then the second thing is, in the context of making those decisions, you have to keep in mind the most disadvantaged. You have to keep in mind the people that are most at risk in your situation. If you have a viable business, what can you do within the confines of that viable business for the people that are hourly workers, who are living hand to mouth? These are very, very challenging issues, for business leaders going forward. And there are similar discussions for the workers. But I think I'll step aside there and hand the baton to Father Nesty.
Well, Steve, first of all, I want to thank you for doing this. I think it's absolutely wonderful on the part of Bridget that she got us together here. You know how much I admire you because you're able to bridge the whole reality of the market economy, all your experience with Exxon, and now that you're teaching, as well as your whole theological background, having an MA in theology, and makes you the perfect person to be able to discuss these questions. You framed the questions very well. Like for myself, particularly as a layman in this, every time I hear you, I learn something new. And the way you frame the question as a justice question is something that I don't think many people will do. All we have heard is you can't threaten people with the virus and let them come out of their social distancing, and other people screaming that they want to go back to work and they need work. And there are a few people who can come together and frame it in such a way that it's manageable. To have a business, to see if it's going to be viable, and then you use the magic word and to discern truly the decision that has to be made that is going to benefit not just the business, but the people who are affected by that business. Because ultimately, businesses are people. And it comes down to that, and particularly the most vulnerable. So I think it's great. So help us more look at this when we see governors in various states trying to open up businesses slowly and slowly. We joked earlier before getting on here about not having haircuts, and I called the woman who gives me my haircut, and she said she's going to start back on Monday, but she's loaded for another week because people have been putting it off for so long. But help us to understand the global impact of this as well, with major industries being affected. I'm thinking even the sports industry that you were talking about before. We haven't had one game of any kind, and what that is doing. I frequent concerts with Dr. Edmondson, and we haven't been going to any concert. So what's really going on here? How bad is this thing?
Yeah, we really haven't had an peacetime economic disruption of this magnitude globally since the 1930s. The difference, in the 1930s, you had synchronized depressions across all major economies. That was basically brought on by mismanagement of the financial system. They didn't keep sufficient liquidity in the financial markets, and secondly, trade wars. The good news this time around, we have synchronized recessions hitting without any question. It'll be interesting because there'll be a snapback recovery just when the restrictions are lifted. So you're going to see like the second quarter is going to be disastrous. And then the third quarter from a much lower base will look like a rebound. But the sort of fundamental damage in many industries in the synchronized recessions, it's going to settle in over time, and it's going to put a sort of a ceiling on how far we come back, how fast. So it's very, very, sort of serious. Good news this time around is the financial monetary authorities are providing plenty of stimulus and liquidity, and the financial system is not cratering. So that's going to be a big help. There's a lot of headlines about trade wars, but in point of fact, what's actually evolving out of this is sort of what I would characterize as a sort of realignment of the global trading system. Apple isn't pulling everything back to the United States. Apple is deciding how much to diversify its overseas manufacturing, how much to leave in China, how much to put in Vietnam or the Philippines or India. You're still going to have a lot of global trade. It's just taking into account the fact that unrecognized risks in places like China are now recognized. So, you know, these are positive things that are going to help us, you know, eventually recover. Now, when we get to the question of, you know, sort of what is the common good in this situation? You know, the seed I would plant with you is this involves a trial and error process on risk. The trial and error process on risk is this. The risk that we are currently paralyzed, partially paralyzed by, is what we don't know about the virus. We don't know for sure how to treat it. We don't know how to test for it rapidly on a wide scale yet. And we don't know how to have a vaccine for it. And we don't know if we practice social distancing and good protocols, how much of a flare-up we're likely to get. The result of these unknowns is it tends to have a paralyzing effect on economic decision-making. People can't make decisions because they can't put together a coherent scenario about how things are likely to play out, when things will be possible, when behaviors will change. For example, when are people going to get back on planes or go back to movie theaters? Okay, those kinds of things are paralyzed to a great extent by these unknowns. So there are two things we can do about this. Obviously, the one thing we're doing about this is we're working like heck on all these fronts, on testing, on vaccines, on treatments, and making progress. And all signs, you know, everything that indicates that, you know, we're making progress is going to help people behave in less risk-averse fashions. The second piece of it is we're just going to have to go out and test the frontiers. And we're going to have a certain amount of tolerance for the fact that there will be some flare-ups and hotspots. And, you know, we're going to have to make prudent decisions about how to react when they happen. It was an interesting, you mentioned sports, Father Nesty. There was an interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal today about how baseball is attempting to restart. And baseball has put a proposal in front of the players union. And it's laid out a very careful protocol about how frequently they're going to test people, who they're going to test, what happens when somebody gets infected, and so forth. This is the kind of trial and error process that we're going to have to go through. And while we wait for these, you know, definitive developments on the medical front to hopefully, you know, come to pass. So, you know, to conclude, we're basically reopening. We have to take some risks, and I think actually we're not doing a bad job in terms of walking down this road.
You know, two things occur to me in what you say and why we have to take these risks. Because I haven't listened to a lot that's been going on in the media, but one thing becomes apparent, and I think Dr. Fauci talked about this, that while we may have gone down in the curve here, and we may be coming out of this thing by the end of May and into June, there can be a recurrence of it again in the fall. And I guess that's the risk that you're talking about, and how these prudential judgments are going to have to be made. But help me to understand a little bit better the stimulus initiatives that have been taken by the government, by the president and the government, to stabilize the economy.
Yeah, I mean, the stimulus efforts, and I'd be, you know, exaggerating my own knowledge here to imply that I've studied this exhaustively, but I would rank them in the following order. There have been a tremendous amount of liquidity put into the banking system. Because you know, if you go back to the Great Depression, what killed the economy was the bank system failed. Over 8,000 banks around the United States failed in the 1930s. And every time they failed, it was after seizing businesses and farms and stuff because of mortgage payments that hadn't been made. So that, you know, what the Fed and what the Treasury have done is essentially take the banking system and stuff it with liquidity and enable banks to extend loans, to not have to pursue collateral, and generally to avoid the kind of financial pandemic that would truly paralyze the economy. Banking system is the economy's circulatory system. You have to prevent the banking system from having a heart attack if you want the body to live. And that's essentially the first thing that the government has done, and done well. The second thing that they've done is try to maintain consumption. So they've given a lot of money directly to people, you know, who are being laid off. Massive amounts of unemployment payments, you know, checks. In the old days, it used to be called helicopter money. You know, that was a phrase coined by Huey Long, I think, in the 1930s. He was saying, you know, let's just go ahead, you know, throw dollar bills out of helicopters. But what it has the effect of doing is buying time. It's attempting to basically maintain consumption in the economy, enable people to feed themselves and pay the rent while we wait for the jobs to come back and reopen. The $64,000 question, and it's probably a much bigger number, is that stuff runs out in a month or two. Not the unemployment insurance, but the sort of special payments. And that's where the big discussion is lodged now. Does there need to be a third direct stimulus where the government creates demand or gives money to the states or does something, you know, to sort of extend this? Fed Chairman Powell got on you know, the media, I think day before yesterday, I think, and basically said there's going to need to be a third stimulus. And that's probably, you know, there's going to be a big discussion about what that has to be, you know, because this is where really stimulus is inefficient. You went back to the financial crisis. There was a, you know, like a $900 billion stimulus package, which seemed big at the time, you know, for shovel-ready projects. And, you know, a lot of that stuff really never actually produced anything. So there's going to have to be a serious discussion about kind of what the next stimulus package is. I don't know how much time you have, Bridget, but there is one other issue I want to bring up, and that is theologically, how should people of faith think about the fact that there's a pandemic? And, you know, I think there's been some very interesting developments here that are core to this Center for Faith and Culture. And if it would be all right, I would like to say something about that.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Oh, please do.
Yeah.
Okay, so there have been 3 or 4 columns in both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times reflecting on the question of what theologians call theodicy and the pandemic, or, you know, how could a good and gracious God unleash evil on the world of this sort? It's been, you know, also framed in terms of how should people of faith understand something that comes out of left field and does so much damage. And I would say this is a topic that deserves more airtime. Because it is an extraordinarily difficult and complicated but overlooked topic in the present day and age. You know, it just by coincidence, I happened to be going back through Bernard Anderson's book on the Old Testament. So it went into this period of time. It was my text from my days in the Master's in Theology program. One of the things that jumps out is the whole discussion of the prophets of Israel and how they went through, long periods of time where basically the people of Israel forgot God. They went, the prophets arose in ancient Israel because people were busy trading and making money and being married and practicing, pagan religions, and the God of Israel was forgotten. And you could make a pretty good case that the U.S. has been doing a good job trending in that direction. You can make an even better case that Europe has already done it. The message of the Old Testament prophets was, at some point, God calls you back. Something will arise that shows you're not in control of your life and your situation nearly as much as you thought. And indeed, you've been committing a grave sin by forgetting God and being, untrue to your covenant. Now, this is slippery ground, and it's very unpopular ground in the current secular world. The Economist a year or so ago talked about the earthquake that happened in Lisbon in the 1600s, and how the Jesuits at the time interpreted it as a great moral rebuke from God, and scientists that arose later said no, it's an earthquake. So we have this great dilemma. When things like this happen, how much are they natural, how much are they human, and how much are they something of God's will? And I've always been suspicious and cautious about preachers who are too quick, to come in and say they know that, this is a message from God. However, when you've had decades of trends, and when, you have to look at the bigger signs of the times, at least the question is on the table. And the question is on the table, not just because I'm bringing it up, but Ross Douthat brought it up in the Times, and, Houses of Worship column brought it up in the Wall Street Journal. So, over to you, Father Nesty. How do we think about this? Do we see the hem of God walking through the hallway in this pandemic?
Well, Steve, thank you so much for that. And also reminding us about the prophets and the basic message that you have forgotten the living God. And when people really forgot the living God, it is very politically incorrect in our country to make any reference to God whatsoever. And even if you go back to the Declaration of Independence, where there is a reference to a creator, and at least we have the reference to being creatures, I think it's the underlying sense of the understanding of the person as autonomous in the American mindset, which is the gravest threat to keeping things in right relationship. What you're talking about here is the acceptance of a creating God who made a creation good and very good when it came to the human person, and created the human person with that kind of freedom, and also a universe working with the laws of nature. We have put those discussions simply by the wayside. And what we have fallen into is the myth of autonomy. And once you buy into the myth of autonomy, you begin to think that you're going to be in control of everything.
Yep.
And when you are in control of everything, when the laws of nature fall apart and you don't know how to control them anymore, as you said, we're having a difficult time finding even a remedy or a vaccine for this virus. And then Don Froelich, who is a professor of faith and science for the Center for Faith and Culture, made a statement the other day, and I didn't follow up on it with him, but he said that recently they found in the Antarctic so many other of these viruses in the water, and people just don't know what to do with those. So, yes, I think the fundamental thing here is to accept that we are not the creator. We are the creature. We are existing in a world which is essentially good in the minds of the creator, and yet even in its laws of nature presents us with moments of chaos, with moments of creativity, with dying of stars and so forth. And we have to learn all of that. But what we have to learn the most is that we are totally dependent on a creator who holds us in existence, number one. Number two, that we are created interdependently. And it's in those interdependent relationships that we can find a life which is sustainable. And perhaps what we're seeing in this pandemic, even though we're practicing social distancing, you and I here today are talking on this technological medium, and we are relating and talking about how we have to behave in all this. And is it a punishment of God? I would say it's not a punishment of God in itself. It is a natural phenomenon that we are experiencing in what is essentially a broken world. And the only way we respond to the broken world is to understand that love is the only solution in our relationships and collaboration for the common good. I just read a quotation from Pope Francis today. Wow, it was really something. I can't quote it here, but I did quote it this morning in my little homily in Mass. He says, rivers don't drink their own water, and trees don't eat their own fruit. He said, and so it is with people. We should not only just be seeking our own happiness, but rejoice when we have made others happy. In other words, we're not consuming our own happiness. And we're not seeking only our own happiness, but we're seeking that for others. Maybe that's the essential lesson that we have to learn from the pandemic as well. I don't know whether that speaks to what you were talking about, but the autonomy question is absolutely critical.
I would say a couple of things. One is, typically in Old Testament terms, when there was a disaster of this sort, it was interpreted as a call for reflection and repentance, and for people to begin anew, to behave differently. Second, one of the definitions of, sort of ways to understand evil is not that God is the author of evil, but that at times God withdraws his protection. And, you can make an interesting argument that what's happened in this situation is, the protection broke down, and things then spread and exposed us to something that we did not have the means to handle. I would say, Father Nesty, that I do see in this call to reflection, and to think about how to change our behaviors. We're obviously called to more of a sense of the community, and how to serve the community in big and small ways, because in some sense we're all in this together. Okay.
Well, if I could just make one point and build on what you were saying, to go back to that example about the viability of a business or not, and whether the owners of that business or the people who have invested their money are going to close it in relationship to the disadvantaged, the one who look to that work to sustain their lives. At the heart of that of that discernment process precisely comes. Whether you are going to look upon yourself as autonomous and not care about other people, or you're going to see your interrelationships and interdependence to make the kind of decision, the best decision that you can make to benefit all. And you use the word common good. I think that's at the heart of it. Your insights are very, very beautiful, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, that process of discernment, I think that, one of the things I completely agree with Father Nesty is put yourself in the shoes of a business leader. How narrowly do you define the problem? Do you basically define the problem, how do I get my money out of this venture? Do you define the problem in terms of, do I have a successful venture potentially that I can save, or if not, how am I going to salvage resources and do something different that will be viable? That's a more expansive definition. A third of the definition is in the path to doing whatever I think is best there. How do I take care of the people that are dependent on me to the maximum extent that makes sense? That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to keep them employed all the way into bankruptcy. It may mean that you have to do what you can to involve them, to help them transition to other things, or to come back into your new business. There are many options in this regard. Your point is always talking about discernment. And the thing about discernment in the Father Nesty school of thought is that it is expansive and it incorporates many elements. It's not narrow, and it's not, this is your point about it's not just focused on the me. So, and there is so much of that today.
Wow. And you know what, Steve, the next time we get together, and I hope there is going to be a next time, because I find this very, very good for mine. But your phrase, it is the moment for reflection. And if everybody takes that seriously, then I think these things that you've been referring to will coalesce. And all of them are good. That's interesting. All of the principles are good, but it's a question of a balancing off in the human condition, which is finite. We are not infinite, and we only have a limited amount of resources to work with. So what do we do with that? That's great.
Well, I would close by basically saying one of the great lessons of biblical history is God's ability to bring good things out of suffering, and we are His agents in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both for such a beautiful dialogue. You start in one place talking about businesses and the economy, and then you just walk through that process of leadership and discernment and what it means to be a part of the bigger picture and to realize we're all creatures in this world just trying to figure it out together. So, what I kept hearing is, as someone who will be, patronizing businesses or trying to participate in the economy, is just to pray for the people who have to make that decision and who have to discern those things, because it's not easy at all.
Amen. Good summary, Bridget.
Well,
thank you, Bridget.
Thank you so much. You're wonderful, and I really hope we get to do this again. This was wonderful.
Look, anytime I get to see you and Father Nesty, I'm going to take that opportunity. So feel free to call on me. Okay.
Great.
Good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.